Patrick Connor from QueensburyRules.com here once again with another episode of Boxing with the Beard. We're doing a preview show today. Hopefully it shouldn't be too long, but I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone who checked out the first video, thumbs up it, liked it, offered feedback, everything. I really appreciate that. Got a lot better feedback than I thought it would get, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much. So I just wanted to jump right in and talk about some of the bouts that we have this weekend. For example, tonight, I guess I'll start at the bottom kind of, and tonight, Thursday night, we have a fight card from Roseland Ballroom in New York City. It's a fairly small fight card, I suppose, but my guess is that it will probably be televised locally in New York City, as many of those fight cards from ballrooms are. And it is featuring Pavel Miranda, who's I guess kind of the opponent, versus Gabriel Bracero. He's a Puerto Rican guy, kind of a slick, stylist type of guy. In my opinion, not super impressive, but he's put in with a guy, Pavel Miranda, who is like 2-7-1 in his last 10 fights. Lost a handful of times by stoppage, and probably is not going to win that fight. I think that's safe to say. But notable also on the card is that Yuri Foreman is fighting once again. He's coming off a win, but he's fighting in a 6-rounder against a guy that I'm really not familiar with. But like I said, I guess it's notable. He's a Belarusian Jewish fighter that is kind of grown, I think, a bit of a following in New York City. He's not, in my opinion, real fun to watch, but in any event, they're fighting tonight on Thursday night, and I don't think it's being shown nationally at all. Maybe you'll find a stream from it, I'm not sure. Also, tomorrow night, Friday night, on Televisa, there are a couple of bouts that are somewhat interesting. For example, Adrian Estrella is fighting. He is a local from Monterrey, where they're going to be televising the fight card from. He can hit pretty good. He's got a nice punch. He reminds me a little bit of Juanma Lopez in a way. Obviously, he's not quite as refined. I think he only has about 9 or 10 fights, and but he seems to have a little bit of a following in that area, and he's fighting Arturo Camargo. They also call him Tyson with a Z, an obvious reference to Mike Tyson, because he's something like 36-5 with 33 knockouts or something like that. I didn't write down his record, but I saw a couple videos of him. He doesn't really remind me of Mike Tyson in the ring all that much. He's a little bit more tentative than Mike. Doesn't really come right at opponents exactly the same way, or at least not the classic Mike Tyson that most of us think of when someone says Mike Tyson. But I guess that fight could wind up being something interesting, with two guys who like to bang and are probably going to come right at each other, because I haven't seen them fight any other way. And headlining that card is Antonio Lozada against Jorge Pimentel. Lozada is another kind of prospect type. He has pretty solid power, likes to go to the body a lot, but he comes in kind of wide. Not really sure about his chin, although his technique reminds me a little bit of Antonio Margarito, just a little bit. Just kind of bores his way in, throws a lot to the body, and throws a little bit wide, isn't super fast. But Jorge Pimentel, he's a bit of a trial horse. He's gotten blown out by Mercito Gesta, Joan Guzman, and not to say that those guys are bad, but getting blown out by those guys is not good. So that's kind of a showcase, I would say, for Lozada, and he should win that one. Like I said, Adrian Estrella and Arturo Camargo, that should be a decent fight, but I'm not sure how deep they're going on the card for televising that, but that'll be on Televisa tomorrow night. Also, ESPN2 Friday Night Fights. I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention that. It's not a particularly strong card, or at least it doesn't look to be, but there's something to talk about on there anyway. Jonathan Maicello, he is a Peruvian fighter, and there aren't too many times that you can talk about Peruvian fighters. They don't have an especially deep list of fighters to talk about, unfortunately, but it's a very nice country, and so I guess it's worth talking about because he's headlining the card against Rustam Nagaev, who has he's just kind of a solid guy, maybe slightly less than solid. Doesn't really punch very hard, kind of gritty, seems to have a decent chin. But basically the highlights on his resume are beating Justin Juco, and yeah, that Justin Juco, in I want to say 2008 or 2009, and he went the distance with Alisher Rakhimov, who's another guy that's, I don't know, about on the same level, I would say, as Nagaev, just kind of solid to slightly less than solid. Nothing that special about him, but that's also kind of another showcase, or at least they're hoping it's going to be a showcase, and it kind of depends on what Micello has, I think. Micello kind of has a tricky style, a little bit cute in there sometimes, likes to move his head and drop his guard sometimes, mess around, doesn't really have big power, but has kind of a stiff punch, so I guess it just kind of depends on what Nagaev brings. Also on the card is... Actually, I didn't even write down what else was on the card because I wasn't all that interested in it, to be honest. But I guess then I'll jump right into what's going to be on HBO on tape delay on Saturday. Headlining the card, or at least as far as I know, headlining the card is Zou Shiming, who was a 3-time amateur world champion, a 2-time Olympic gold medalist. Had a fairly prestigious amateur career. And he is facing Eliezer Valenzuela, who's 2-1-2 with 1 knockout. So he's not facing a particularly experienced guy, and he's facing a guy that my guess is probably not on his level skill-wise. That should be yet another showcase on that card. But the point is, I think, to try and open up the door in terms of Chinese boxing, that's kind of an untapped market. UFC was kind of trying to do the same thing not too long ago. They're still trying to kind of work their way into China and tap that keg, as it were, and get some talent from those areas. So I think that's basically what the card's about for the most part. But also, there are a couple of interesting fights on the undercard. First and foremost is Rocky Martinez versus Diego Magdaleno. That's probably the most interesting fight on the card. There's 2 guys who, they don't really shy away from, I don't want to say brawling necessarily, but neither of them should be super hard to find, I should say, and it should be an interesting fight card. Rocky Martinez is a Puerto Rican guy. He probably should have lost to Juan Carlos Burgos not too long ago. I think that was in February. On HBO. A lot of people thought he lost. I thought Burgos beat him myself, and pretty solidly, fairly clearly, but he got I believe it was a split decision, and boxing, what are you going to do? That is what it is. Burgos is moving forward, it seems, and here's Rocky Martinez against Diego Magdaleno, older brother of Jesse Magdaleno. They've been talked about quite a bit, the Magdaleno brothers. They're kind of coming up in the world of boxing, and they're both pretty decent fighters. Basically, Diego is kind of on a tear a little bit. He's won his last 2 fights by stoppage, and I think he only has 1 loss on his record. But he's a good fighter. They should mix it up a little bit, and there should be just enough skill to make it not a complete caveman fight. It should be good. Also on the card is Brian Viloria defending his 2 flyweight titles, or belts, I should say, against Juan Francisco Estrada. I don't really know a ton about him, aside from what I saw on that Wealth TV card, where Viloria unified the titles against Tyson Marquez. And he being Estrada, gave Chocolatito a really good fight. It may have been the best fight on the card. It was entertaining, and he seemed to have a really good chin because Chocolatito's power has been pretty well talked about, and he took quite a few shots from him. And I don't really think it was a case of Chocolatito's power being overrated. I think that it was just that Estrada's chin is good. So that could wind up being interesting for that fact alone. Viloria, of course, as we know, excellent amateur, had a list of amateur accomplishments about as long as my beard, which is long, and he's a good fighter when he's on. He's kind of gone through lapses where he's, I don't want to say messed around, but been not quite as active as he should have been, both in and outside of the ring, in terms of throwing punches and fighting often. And he can kind of seem to get distracted sometimes mid-fight. But it seems for the moment like he's kind of focused himself, and he looked very good in the Hernan Marquez fight. He wound up unifying the titles for the first time, or flyweight titles for the first time in almost 50 years. And I know that a lot of people disagreed with me that that was all that important before that fight. I wrote something about it for QueensburyRules.com, and that's fine. I wasn't trying to make out like the titles themselves were important, but it was a historical accomplishment that I thought was important and should be mentioned, especially with something that, for whatever reason, has been so rare in the last half century. So basically, Viloria himself is on a tear, and I would expect him to win that fight. He can really punch when he sits down on his shots, although he's a good boxer too. That's something that a lot of people don't really give him a ton of credit for. He moves his feet well, he's an athletic guy, quick hands, but when he sits down on his shots, he can really deliver some power. So I would guess that Viloria is going to win that fight, maybe by stoppage. It's notable that Estrada's coming up in weight one class, so that could make a big difference, especially when guys are so small. A couple of pounds makes a much bigger difference than a guy that's 180 pounds moving up 5 pounds or something like that. So that could wind up being interesting because of, one, Estrada's chin, but also the weight factor. And yeah, it's kind of a fight card that's not great, but definitely watchable. And for the most part, that's what we have this weekend. As you can see, I'm in my scrubs. I am trying to do this to get back to lunch, and it is actually just about time for me to go. But if you tuned in, thank you again so much for tuning in. I'm going to try to make this a regular thing once again, and please visit QueensburyRules.com. Check out all of our work. All of our guys there do some excellent writing, and thank you very much for tuning in. Take it easy.